You have failed me, Helena. The words were spoken quietly, yet beneath the 1,000 chandeliers of a Aldridge house, they rang louder than any orchestra. Conversations faltered. Fans froze mid-flutter. Crystal glasses hovered halfway to aristocratic lips. 200 members of London's most ruthless society turned toward the Duke of Aldridge and the woman standing beside him. His wife, his Duchess, his humiliation. Lady Helena Somerset did not cry. She simply stood beneath the glittering lights, her gloved hands resting calmly at her waist while whispers rippled through the ballroom like poison poured slowly into water. "Barren," someone murmured. "A Duchess who cannot produce an heir. What a catastrophe for the Somerset line." William Somerset, Duke of Aldridge, did not look at her when he spoke the final words. "Our marriage," he declared coldly, "was a mistake." Helena felt the room tilt, not from shock. Shock had passed months ago. Somewhere between the physician's examinations, the bitter tonics, and the endless murmured judgments in Aldridge House's endless corridors. But humiliation had weight, and tonight her husband had chosen to place all of it upon her shoulders before all of London. "I will seek an annulment." The orchestra fell silent. No one dared move. Helena turned her head slowly toward the man she had married 3 years earlier. William Somerset was still devastatingly composed. Tall, severe, impossibly controlled. The perfect duke, the perfect judge, the perfect executioner. For a long moment their eyes met across the glittering floor. Helena waited for mercy, waited for the faintest flicker of regret. There was none, so she inclined her head with quiet dignity and walked away. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. London lay beneath a gray April sky as Helena stood beside the narrow window of her modest Bloomsbury townhouse, watching droplets crawl down the glass like reluctant tears. Her fingers turned the gold band on her ring. Once, twice, 100 times. 4 months had passed since that night. 4 months since she left Aldridge House with only 3 trunks, a loyal housekeeper, and the shattered remains of a marriage London had once called perfect. Now the Duchess of Aldridge lived quietly among scholars and booksellers, far from the marble halls where her reputation had been buried. And beneath the navy wool of her dress, life stirred. Helena's hand drifted slowly to the soft curve of her abdomen. 4 months. 4 months since the physician in Bloomsbury had smiled in quiet disbelief. "My lady," he had said gently, "you are with child." The irony still felt cruel enough to be divine punishment. For 3 years Helena had endured the humiliation of examinations. Doctors whispering, ladies speculating, William growing colder with every passing season. 7 physicians had declared the same verdict. The Duchess was barren, defective, useless, and now the child the Duke of Aldridge had publicly demanded from her grew quietly beneath her heart. William Somerset knew nothing. The thought made something sharp and bitter flicker through her chest. He did not know that the wife he had cast aside carried the heir he had destroyed their marriage to obtain. He did not know that fate had already begun its quiet revenge. Helena rested both hands over the gentle swell of her belly. "Your father," she murmured softly, "would never believe this." Outside, a carriage splashed through the muddy street. Somewhere in London's grandest district, William Somerset was likely reviewing estate ledgers with the same cold precision he applied to every other aspect of life. Legacy, lineage, duty, those were the pillars of the Somerset name. Love had never been one of them. A knock sounded at the door. Helena turned. Mrs. Dawson entered moments later carrying a silver tray, her expression carefully neutral. But Helena knew that look. Concern. "My lady," the housekeeper said softly. "There is a letter." Helena's stomach tightened. Not from pregnancy, from instinct. Mrs. Dawson placed the envelope gently on the table beside her. The wax seal glowed deep crimson against thick ivory paper. A lion reared proudly in the imprint, the Somerset crest. Helena stared at it. For a long moment she did not move. Then slowly, she picked it up. The paper was heavy, expensive, the kind William used for matters of consequence. Endings. Mrs. Dawson spoke quietly. "The messenger waits in the hall." Helena's thumb brushed the seal but did not break it. Not yet. Outside the rain intensified, tapping sharply against the window like impatient fingers. "What does he want now?" she whispered. But the city offered no answer. Finally, Helena slipped her finger beneath the wax. The seal cracked softly. Inside, the handwriting was unmistakable. Firm, precise, emotionless. "Lady Helena, matters concerning the annulment of our marriage require your presence at Aldridge House tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon. Your solicitor may accompany you if necessary. The meeting will be brief and limited to contractual discussion." Somerset. Helena read the letter twice, then folded it carefully. Not Helena. Not my dear. Not even wife. Just a title. As though she had never existed beyond a legal inconvenience. As though he had not destroyed her life before 200 witnesses. Helena moved slowly to the window. London blurred beyond the rain. Carriages. Umbrellas. Life continuing without mercy. Her hand rested again on her abdomen. A faint movement answered her touch. Small, but unmistakable. The Duke of Aldridge believed he had discarded a barren wife. Tomorrow, he would learn the truth, and Helena Somerset had not yet decided whether that truth would destroy him or save him. William Somerset had never been a man troubled by doubt. The Duke of Aldridge believed in order, in reason, in decisions made without hesitation. His entire life had been built upon those principles. Yet on the evening before Helena's return to Aldridge House, doubt sat heavily in the quiet library like an uninvited guest. William stood beside the tall window overlooking the gardens. Rain blurred the early spring roses his mother had planted decades earlier, their pale blooms trembling beneath the storm. The house behind him remained perfectly still. 40 rooms, dozens of servants, centuries of Somerset history lining the walls. And yet the place felt strangely hollow. He told himself it was only temporary. Tomorrow the annulment would be finalized, the mistake corrected, the future restored. A duke required an heir. A duchess who could not provide one could not remain. It was not cruelty. It was necessity. At least, that was what he had believed. William's gaze drifted toward the fireplace. The green velvet chair beside it stood empty. Helena used to sit there during the evenings, reading quietly, sometimes speaking, more often simply existing beside him in comfortable silence. He had once found that silence peaceful. Later, he found it unbearable. 3 years of waiting, 3 years of hopeful glances from his aunts, then pity. 3 years of physicians offering increasingly certain conclusions the Duchess could not conceive. 7 doctors, 7 identical verdicts. William had believed them all. He had to. A duke could not accept uncertainty. Not when the Somerset line depended upon him. Yet what unsettled him now was not the doctors. It was Helena's face the night he condemned her. She had not pleaded. She had not cried. She had not begged him to reconsider. She had simply looked at him, those deep green eyes calm and terribly steady beneath the chandeliers of Aldridge House. One long silent moment. Then she had turned and left. By dawn, the Duchess of Aldridge had vanished. No letter, no message, not even a request for reconciliation. It was as though William Somerset had ceased to exist in her world. The realization had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. A knock sounded at the door. Enter. His solicitor, Mr. Hargreaves, stepped quietly into the library. The documents are prepared, Your Grace. William inclined his head. Good. Hargreaves hesitated before placing the papers on the desk. Lady Helena confirmed she will attend tomorrow. I expected she would. The solicitor studied him carefully. If I may speak freely, Your Grace? William turned slightly. Hargreaves had served the Somerset estate for 20 years. Few men in London were more discreet. Proceed. Society still speaks of that evening. William's expression did not change. They may speak as they please. Yes, but there is also sympathy for the Duchess. A faint tightening appeared at William's jaw. Sympathy is irrelevant. Perhaps, Hargreaves said carefully, but public humiliation is rarely forgotten, especially when directed toward a woman who conducted herself with remarkable dignity. William said nothing. Hargreaves cleared his throat and slid the documents forward. The annulment will be finalized once Lady Helena signs. And then, legally, the marriage will be considered void. William studied the papers. 3 years erased with ink and law. So be it. The solicitor gathered his coat. I will see you tomorrow, Your Grace. When the door closed, silence returned. William remained standing behind the desk, staring at the empty chair beside the fireplace. Strange. He could still remember exactly how Helena used to sit there. One ankle tucked beneath the other, a book balanced in her lap, sometimes glancing toward him as though she expected him to speak. He rarely did. Duty had always been clearer than conversation. William turned away from the memory. Tomorrow she would return. Tomorrow the matter would be finished. He told himself that certainty should bring relief. Instead, a strange tension coiled quietly in his chest, as though something in his perfectly ordered life had shifted in a way he could not yet understand. And for the first time since inheriting the title at 12 years old, William Somerset wondered if he had made a mistake. Helena arrived at Aldridge House precisely at 3 in the afternoon. The sky above London remained heavy with storm clouds, the air thick with the scent of rain that had not yet fallen. The grand facade of the ducal estate rose before her exactly as she remembered it. Cold, perfect, immovable. Marble columns framed the entrance like silent judges. Tall windows stared down upon the courtyard, reflecting the gray sky. For 3 years this house had been her world. For 3 years she had tried to make it feel like home. Now it felt like a monument to a life already buried. The hired carriage rolled to a stop. Helena remained seated for a moment longer than necessary, her gloved hand resting lightly over the gentle curve beneath her burgundy velvet gown. 5 months. The child moved faintly beneath her ribs, as if sensing the tension in her body. "We are only here for the truth," she whispered softly. Then she stepped down from the carriage. The front door opened before she reached the steps. Hensley, the Aldridge butler, stood waiting in the doorway. The man had served the Somerset family for more than 30 years. During Helena's time as Duchess, he had always treated her with quiet respect. Now something like sorrow flickered briefly in his expression. "Lady Helena," he said carefully. "Not your grace." The title had already been taken from her. Helena inclined her head politely. "Hensley." He stepped aside to allow her entry. "My lord awaits you in the library." Of course he did. William Somerset always preferred discussions to occur where he felt most in control. Helena crossed the threshold. The familiar scent of polished marble and white roses greeted her instantly. She had always hated those flowers. The entrance hall stretched before her in silent grandeur. Black and white Italian marble floors gleamed beneath towering ceilings. Portraits of Somerset ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes watching her return with aristocratic indifference. Once she had walked these halls as mistress of the estate. Today she walked them as a guest, or perhaps an inconvenience. Her steps echoed softly as Hensley guided her down the long corridor. "Your journey was comfortable, I hope," he said quietly. "Yes," Helena replied. He hesitated. "I am glad to see you well, my lady." The simple kindness warmed her more than she expected. "Thank you, Hensley." They reached the library door. It stood slightly open. Helena could hear the faint rustle of paper inside. He was there. Of course he was. William Somerset never arrived late for anything. Hensley stepped back. "I will inform His Grace you have arrived." "That will not be necessary." Helena pushed the door open herself. William stood beside the fireplace with his back to the door, tall and rigid in his dark coat. One hand rested behind his back in the posture he adopted during difficult negotiations. Even after 4 months apart, Helena recognized it instantly. "Punctual as always," he said without turning. His voice was calm, controlled, almost indifferent. Helena stepped inside. "I came out of obligation, not courtesy." William turned slowly. Their eyes met for the first time since the night he had destroyed her before London society. For a moment neither of them spoke. He looked the same. Dark hair perfectly arranged, impeccable posture, the composure of a man born to command rooms and lives alike. Yet something about him felt strained. There were faint shadows beneath his eyes, as though sleep had not been his companion lately. "The documents are prepared," he said, gesturing toward the desk where the annulment papers waited neatly arranged. "Has your solicitor reviewed them?" Helena walked slowly toward the desk. Her gaze flicked briefly to the papers. 3 years of marriage reduced to a stack of legal parchment. "I did not bring a solicitor." William frowned slightly. "That is unwise." "Perhaps." She removed her gloves with deliberate calm, placing them neatly on the desk. "But I did not come to sign anything." Silence fell across the room, heavy, absolute. William's brow tightened faintly. "I beg your pardon?" Helena lifted her gaze to meet his. Calm.
Steady.
Unshaken. "I came," she said quietly, "to tell you something that changes every document on that desk." His posture stiffened. For the first time since she entered the room, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Helena rested her hand over the gentle curve beneath her gown. The movement was small, but unmistakable. "I am carrying your child, William." The words landed like thunder inside the quiet library. For a moment the Duke of Aldridge did not move, did not breathe, did not speak. The color drained slowly from his face. Helena watched him with a calm that surprised even herself. "You once declared before 200 witnesses," she continued softly, "that I could never give you an heir." She held his stunned gaze. "It appears," she said. "You were mistaken." For several seconds William Somerset did not speak. The words seemed to hang in the air between them like a blade suspended by a thread. "I am carrying your child." The Duke of Aldridge stared at Helena's hand where it rested protectively over her abdomen, a subtle curve, one he had not noticed when she first entered. Now he saw nothing else. "You are certain?" he asked finally. The question came out rough, stripped of its usual aristocratic polish. Helena's lips curved faintly, not with humor, with something far sharper. "I did not come here to play games, William." His throat tightened. "How long?" 4 months. The answer struck him harder than any accusation. 4 months. His mind moved automatically, calculating with the precision of a man trained to govern estates and fortunes. 4 months meant, "You conceived before the announcement?" Yes. Before the ballroom, before the humiliation, before the night he had publicly declared her barren. The room suddenly felt too small. William took a step back, one hand bracing against the edge of the desk. Impossible. And yet, Helena had never lied to him. Not once in 3 years of marriage. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded. The words left his mouth before he could stop them. Helena laughed, a short, bitter sound that cut through the quiet room. "And when exactly should I have told you?" She stepped closer, her green eyes blazing now. "That evening when you called me useless before half the aristocracy of London?" Her voice did not rise, but every word carried the sharp precision of a blade. "Or perhaps the following morning, when I packed my trunks while your servants watched as though I were a criminal leaving your house." William said nothing, because there was nothing to say. "I discovered the truth 2 weeks after I left Aldrich House," she continued. "I had been ill. Mrs. Dawson called a physician." Helena folded her hands together to steady them. He examined me and smiled. Her gaze lifted again to William. "Imagine my surprise when he informed me that I was not barren." Each word struck him like a hammer. "7 physicians examined you," William said quietly. "Yes, and all of them agreed that the defect must be mine." Helena's voice hardened. "Tell me, William, did you ever question them?" He hesitated. That hesitation was answer enough. Helena nodded slowly. "No," she said softly. "Of course you didn't. Because dukes were not wrong. Because the Somerset line could not fail. Because it was easier to blame a woman's body than question a man's pride." William dragged a hand across his face. Something heavy and unfamiliar pressed against his chest. Regret. "Helena." She stepped back immediately. "No." The word cut him off like a slammed door. "You do not get to speak my name as though we are still husband and wife." Her composure cracked slightly then, only slightly, but William saw it. "I spent 3 years believing I was broken," she whispered. 3 years wondering why my body failed you." The pain in her voice hit him harder than any accusation. "I prayed," she continued quietly. "I endured examinations no woman should ever have to endure." Her gaze lifted again, cold now. "And you repaid that devotion by condemning me before London society." William felt the weight of every word, because every word was deserved. "You said I was useless," she reminded him. "You said our marriage was a mistake." Helena placed her hand over her stomach again. "This child exists because you were wrong." Silence filled the room, not empty silence, a suffocating one. William forced himself to speak. "You should have told me." Helena stared at him. For a moment he thought she might strike him. "Why?" Her voice trembled now. "Why should I have written to the man who destroyed me?" He had no answer, because there was none. Helena gathered her gloves from the desk. "I did not come here for reconciliation," she said calmly. "I came so that you would know the truth." She moved toward the door. "Helena, wait." She stopped but did not turn. "This child will carry your blood," she said quietly. "But understand this clearly, Your Grace." For the first time since she entered the room she used his title, and it sounded like a weapon. "You forfeited any claim to us the night you chose pride over mercy." William's chest tightened. "You cannot mean that." She looked over her shoulder then, and the sorrow in her eyes was far worse than anger. "I mean every word." Her hand rested protectively over her belly. "My child will not grow up in a house where his mother was treated as disposable." Then she opened the door and walked out of the library. William remained standing beside the desk. The annulment papers still lay untouched before him. 3 years of marriage waiting to be erased. But they meant nothing now, because the heir he had demanded, the heir he had humiliated his wife to obtain, already existed, and he had cast the mother of that child out of his life. William Somerset sank slowly into the chair behind the desk. For the first time in his life, the Duke of Aldrich did not know what to do. Helena did not allow herself to cry in the carriage. She sat upright as the horses carried her away from Aldrich House, her hands folded carefully over the small curve of her abdomen. The rain had begun again. London passed beyond the carriage window in blurred shades of gray. Vendors shouting beneath awnings, servants rushing across wet streets, the city utterly indifferent to the quiet storm that had just erupted inside the Duke of Aldrich's library. Helena closed her eyes. She could still see William's face. The shock, the disbelief, the terrible realization spreading slowly through his expression as the truth settled over him. For 3 years he had believed she was barren. For 4 months he had believed himself free. Now he knew he had cast aside the mother of his heir. The carriage rolled to a stop before her modest Bloomsbury townhouse. Helena stepped down slowly. The moment the door closed behind her, the strength she had carried all afternoon began to crack. Mrs. Dawson hurried from the sitting room at once. "My lady." Helena gripped the edge of the table near the door. "He knows." The words came out almost as a whisper. Mrs. Dawson guided her gently toward the armchair by the fire. "You told him everything?" "Yes." Helena sank into the chair, exhaustion settling into her bones. "He asked why I never wrote to him." Mrs. Dawson's lips tightened. "And what did you say?" "The truth." Helena rested both hands over her stomach. "That he lost the right to know the night he humiliated me." The baby shifted faintly beneath her touch, a small, reassuring movement. Mrs. Dawson knelt beside her. "Did he ask you to return?" Helena shook her head. "No." But her gaze drifted toward the fire. He looked lost. The admission surprised even her. William Somerset had never looked lost. He had always been the most certain man in any room. And yet when she left the library, for a brief moment he had looked like a man watching his entire world collapse. Helena pushed the thought aside. "It changes nothing," she said quietly. Mrs. Dawson studied her carefully. "Perhaps not." But the older woman said nothing more. Across London, William Somerset had not moved from the library. The annulment papers still lay untouched on the desk. Hours had passed. The fire had burned low. Yet the Duke of Aldridge remained seated in silence. 4 months. The number repeated endlessly in his mind. 4 months. The heir he had demanded. The heir he had publicly accused Helena of being unable to provide. Already existed, and he had condemned her before 200 witnesses only days after that child had been conceived. William leaned forward, pressing his hands against his temples. He had trusted the physicians. He had trusted logic. He had trusted certainty. But none of that excused what he had done. A knock sounded quietly at the door. "Your Grace?" Hensley's voice asked. "Yes." "The evening meal has been prepared." "I am not hungry." Hensley hesitated. "As you wish." The door closed again. William stared down at the annulment documents. Then slowly, deliberately he pushed them aside. They no longer mattered. What mattered now was far worse. Helena believed she owed him nothing. And she was right. He had forfeited every claim the moment he chose pride over mercy. William rose and crossed to the writing desk. For several minutes he stood there without moving. Then he took out a sheet of paper, dipped the pen in ink, and began to write. "Helena." The pen hovered. The words refused to come. What apology could possibly erase what he had done? He tried again. "Helena, I have no right to write to you." William paused. For the first time in his life, the Duke of Aldridge felt something dangerously close to shame. Yet the truth remained inescapable. She carried his child, and whether she allowed him into that child's life or not, he would spend the rest of his days living with the consequences of the night he chose pride over love. William set the pen down briefly, then picked it up again, because silence now would only make his crime worse. The letter arrived 3 days later. Helena recognized the handwriting immediately. William's script had always been unmistakable, precise, controlled, every line perfectly measured. But this time the envelope looked different. There was no ducal crest pressed into scarlet wax, no symbol of Somerset authority, only her name, Lady Helena, written carefully, almost cautiously. Helena stood by the window for a long moment before opening it. The Bloomsbury morning was bright for the first time in days. Sunlight spilled across the narrow street, catching on carriage wheels and the pale stone of nearby houses. Mrs. Dawson watched quietly from the doorway. "You should read it, my lady." Helena nodded slowly. She broke the plain wax seal. The paper inside trembled faintly in her hands, not from fear, from the strange weight of expectation she refused to acknowledge. Her eyes moved across the first line. "Helena, I have no right to write these words." She stopped. For several seconds she simply stared at the sentence. William Somerset had never admitted he lacked the right to anything. Yet the words remained there, stark and unmistakable. Helena continued reading. "You were correct about everything. I judged you without patience. I condemned you without mercy. I allowed pride to speak where kindness should have. There is no explanation that excuses what I did. Only the truth." Helena lowered herself slowly into the chair beside the window. Her heart beat harder with every line. "You were never broken. You were never the failure. The failure was mine. Tears burned suddenly behind her eyes. For 3 years she had lived beneath the quiet suspicion that perhaps something inside her truly was defective. Even after discovering the pregnancy, that doubt had never fully disappeared. Now the man who once condemned her was admitting the truth she had long needed to hear. Helena blinked quickly and continued, I will not ask you to return to Aldrich House. I will not ask for forgiveness. I do not deserve either. But I ask one thing if you can bear it. Allow me to provide for you and for our child. Allow me to stand at a distance if necessary, but do not deny me the chance to be a father. The letter ended simply. William. No title, no crest, just a man. Helena read the letter again, then once more. The baby shifted beneath her ribs, a soft flutter that felt almost like an answer. Mrs. Dawson approached quietly. What does he say? Helena folded the letter carefully. He asks forgiveness. And? Helena looked down at the gentle curve of her stomach. Her voice softened. I don't know if I can give that yet. Mrs. Dawson nodded. That is honest. But he did something else, Helena continued. What? He admitted he was wrong. The housekeeper studied her closely. That is not a small thing for a duke. No, Helena murmured. It isn't. She rose slowly and crossed to the writing desk. Fresh paper waited beside the ink. Mrs. Dawson watched in silence. What will you say to him? Helena dipped the pen into the ink. Her hand moved steadily. William, your letter has been received. I acknowledge the effort it must have taken for you to write those words. But words alone cannot rebuild what was broken. If you truly wish to prove your sincerity, come to Bloomsbury tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon. Not as the Duke of Aldrich, come as William, a man who claims he wishes to be a father. If you are prepared to listen rather than command, I will receive you. Helena. She sealed the letter with plain wax. No crest, no title, just truth. Mrs. Dawson carried it to the waiting messenger. Helena returned to the window. Her hand rested gently over her stomach. Your father wishes to try, she whispered softly. Outside, London bustled beneath warm sunlight. Inside the quiet Bloomsbury townhouse, Helena waited. Tomorrow would decide whether William Somerset truly intended to become the man he claimed to be, or whether the Duke of Aldrich would remain the man who destroyed her. William Somerset arrived at the Bloomsbury townhouse 15 minutes early. He had come on foot. No carriage, no crest, no servants announcing his name, only a man in a plain dark coat standing before a modest green door. The house was small. Painfully small compared to Aldrich House. 4 narrow windows, a simple iron railing, curtains that fluttered gently in the spring breeze. William stared at it longer than necessary. Helena lived here because of him, because he had driven her out of the life that should have been hers. At exactly 3 o'clock, he lifted his hand and knocked. The door opened almost immediately. Mrs. Dawson stood there. Her sharp eyes studied him from head to toe. Your Grace? William shook his head quietly. William. Her brow lifted slightly, but after a moment she stepped aside. She is in the sitting room. William entered. The air smelled faintly of lavender and freshly baked bread. Warm, lived in, nothing like the cold perfection of Aldrich House. For the first time in years, William realized how lifeless his own estate had always been. Helena stood by the window when he entered. The sunlight fell softly across her pale green dress. Her hair was loosely braided over one shoulder, and the curve of her stomach was unmistakable now. The sight stole the breath from his lungs. His child, alive, growing, real. She turned slowly when she heard his footsteps. William. Helena. For a moment they simply looked at each other. So much had changed in 4 months, yet something remained painfully familiar between them. You came without your title, she observed, as you asked, and without a carriage. I did not think a duke was invited today. A faint flicker of approval passed through her expression, but it vanished quickly. You wish to prove your sincerity, she said. Yes. Then listen. William nodded. I will. Helena crossed the room slowly, one hand resting over her belly. This child will not be raised in fear. It will not be raised beneath expectations that crush its spirit. William's voice was quiet. I understand. You will not speak to me as though I am property to be reclaimed. I will not. You will not decide our future without my consent. I will not. She studied him carefully, searching, measuring. Why? She asked finally. The question hung between them. Why do you want this now? William did not answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow breath. Because the life I built was empty. Helena's brow tightened. You had everything. Yes. He looked around the small sitting room. and none of it mattered once you were gone. Helena said nothing. William met her eyes. I spent my life believing legacy was the most important thing a man could protect. His voice lowered. But when you left Aldridge House, I realized the only living part of that house had left with you. Helena's breath caught faintly. And now? She asked softly. William stepped forward, but stopped several feet away. Careful not to invade her space. Now I want to become someone worthy of the family we created. His gaze dropped briefly to the curve of her stomach. I do not ask for forgiveness. He looked back at her. I only ask for the chance to earn it. Silence filled the room. Helena watched him for a long time, long enough that William felt every second pass like a judgment. Finally she spoke. You cannot rebuild 3 years of damage with one apology. I know. You cannot erase what happened that night. I know. You cannot expect me to trust you again quickly. I do not. Another long silence. Then Helena stepped closer, not far, but closer than before. Her hand moved slowly over her abdomen. The baby moves often now, she said quietly. William's eyes softened. Does it? Yes. She hesitated, then asked softly, Would you like to feel? The question struck him like lightning. I may? She guided his hand gently to the curve of her belly. For a moment nothing happened. Then, a strong kick. William's breath left him in a stunned laugh. Our child. Helena watched his face carefully. There were tears in his eyes. Real ones, and suddenly something inside her chest loosened. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of something that might someday grow into it. She covered his hand with hers. William. Yes. If we try again. He held his breath. It will be different. It must be. No cold silences. Never again. No decisions made without me. Never. No pride placed above love. William's voice broke slightly. I swear it. Helena studied him one final time, then nodded slowly. Very well. William blinked. Very well? We will try. The words were quiet, but they changed everything. William exhaled shakily. Helena, this does not mean forgiveness. I understand. It means you begin earning it. A small smile touched his lips. Then I will spend the rest of my life doing exactly that. Outside the Bloomsbury window, the clouds finally parted. Sunlight spilled across the room. Helena rested both hands over her belly. Their child moved again beneath her touch. And for the first time since the night the Duchess of Aldridge had been publicly humiliated, hope quietly returned.